The casket was mahogany, polished to a mirror shine, gold handles, white silk interior. And when the Italian mobsters forced it open at gunpoint in front of 300 mourners, expecting to confirm that Bumpy Johnson's best friend was really dead, here's what they found instead. Thompson submachine guns, shotguns, pistols, enough firepower to start a war, because there was no body in that casket. There never had been. And in that moment, as 50 armed mobsters stood in the middle of Abyssinian Baptist Church surrounded by what they thought were grieving civilians, they realized the horrible truth. They weren't at a funeral. They were standing in the middle of a trap. And Bumpy Johnson had been waiting for them to walk into it. August 3rd, 1954. James "Quick" Eddie Morrison died on a Tuesday afternoon. Heart attack, massive, sudden, gone before the ambulance arrived. He was 51 years old, Bumpy's closest friend for 26 years. They'd grown up together in Harlem, run numbers together, survived wars with Dutch Schultz, Lucky Luciano, the police, the FBI. Quick Eddie had been the best man at Bumpy's wedding, godfather to Bumpy's daughter. The kind of friend you don't replace. You just learn to live with the hole they leave behind. Bumpy got the call at 4:17 p.m. He was in his office above Small's Paradise when the phone rang. Quick Eddie's wife, Eleanor, crying so hard she could barely speak. "James is gone, Bumpy. He's gone. Heart attack. The doctor said it was instant. He didn't suffer." Bumpy sat there for a long time after hanging up, didn't move, didn't cry, just stared at the wall and felt something inside him go cold and hard. By 6 p.m., word had spread through Harlem. Quick Eddie Morrison was dead. People started gathering outside his brownstone on 139th Street. Neighbors brought food. Musicians from the jazz clubs came to pay respects. Old numbers runners who'd worked with Eddie back in the 30s showed up with flowers and memories. Harlem was mourning one of its own. But 60 blocks south in Little Italy, in a social club on Mulberry Street, a different conversation was happening. Vito Genovese sat at the head of a long table. Around him were 12 of his captains and soldiers, Tony the Blade, Carmine the Snake, Joey Knuckles, men with dead eyes and blood on their hands. They weren't mourning Quick Eddie Morrison, they were celebrating. "This is it," Genovese said, tapping his cigar on a crystal ashtray. "This is the opening we've been waiting for." Quick Eddie was Bumpy's eyes and ears, his strategist, his brother. With Eddie gone, Bumpy's going to be emotional, distracted, vulnerable. One of the captains leaned forward. "You want to hit him at the funeral?" "Exactly," Genovese smiled. "Every important person in Harlem's going to be at that funeral. Bumpy, his crew, his allies, all in one place, all distracted by grief. We surround the church, we go in heavy, and we end this." End what? The Bumpy Johnson problem. The Harlem problem. We've been trying to take that territory for 10 years. This is our chance. Tony the Blade cleared his throat. "Boss, hitting a funeral, that's going to bring heat. A lot of heat. The cops, the press, the public." "Let them come," Genovese said coldly. "By the time anyone reacts, Bumpy and his top people will be dead. Harlem will be leaderless. We move in, take over the numbers racket, and anyone who complains ends up like Bumpy. Quick, final, permanent." The room went quiet. Then Joey Knuckles spoke up. "When's the funeral?" "Saturday. Abyssinian Baptist Church on 138th Street. Genovese stood up. "We'll bring 50 men, surround every exit. When Bumpy arrives, we confirm he's there, then we go in. No mercy. No survivors. We send a message that nobody, not even the king of Harlem, is untouchable." The plan was set, but what Genovese didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Bumpy Johnson had already heard about it, because Bumpy had informants everywhere, bartenders, waiters, shoeshine boys, people the mob never noticed, people who heard everything. August 4th, one day after Quick Eddie died, a busboy from a restaurant on Mulberry Street showed up at Bumpy's office. His name was Paulie, young Italian kid who'd been feeding Bumpy information for 2 years in exchange for protection and cash. "Mr. Johnson," Paulie said nervously, "Genovese is planning something. They're going to hit the funeral. How many men? 50, maybe more. They're bringing serious firepower." Bumpy's expression didn't change. "When?" "Saturday." They're planning to surround the church and come in shooting once they confirm you're inside. Bumpy sat back in his chair. Most men would have canceled the funeral, would have hidden, would have run. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't most men. He'd just lost his best friend, and now the mob thought they could use Eddie's funeral to kill him. That wasn't just a tactical move, that was disrespect. And disrespect demanded a response. "Thank you, Polly." Bumpy handed the kid $500. "You didn't see anything. You didn't hear anything. Understand?" "Yes, sir." After Polly left, Bumpy made a phone call. "Get everyone to my office, now." Within an hour, 15 men were crowded into that room. Illinois Gordon, Junie Bird, Marcus Tallboy Hayes, Willie Fish Jackson, every senior member of Bumpy's organization. Bumpy stood at the head of the table. "The Italians are planning to hit Eddie's funeral," he said quietly. 50 men. They think we'll all be distracted by grief. They think we're vulnerable. The room erupted. Angry voices, threats, men reaching for guns. Illinois Gordon slammed his fist on the table. "We call it off. We move the funeral. We protect you." "No," Bumpy said. His voice was calm but absolute. "We don't call it off. We give them exactly what they want." "What?" "We let them come to the funeral. We let them surround the church. We let them think they've got us trapped." Junie Bird stared at him. "Boss, they'll have 50 guns. We'll have more. But we'll have something they don't." Marcus looked confused. "What's that?" "Surprise?" Over the next 48 hours, Bumpy Johnson orchestrated something unprecedented. He kept Quick Eddie's death quiet, told the newspapers the funeral was Saturday but didn't publicize the time or location, let the mob's informants feed them the information they expected. Abyssinian Baptist Church, 2 p.m. But the body, Quick Eddie's actual body, wasn't prepared for burial. Bumpy had it moved to a private mortuary in Brooklyn, hidden, protected, and in its place, he prepared something else entirely. Friday night, the night before the funeral, Bumpy met with Reverend Marcus from Abyssinian Baptist. The Reverend was a friend, a man who understood that sometimes protecting a community required unconventional methods. "Reverend," Bumpy said quietly, "tomorrow, men are going to come to your church with guns. They're going to try to kill me and everyone I care about. I need to use your church to stop them." The Reverend listened as Bumpy explained the plan. When he finished, the Reverend was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Eddie Morrison was a good man. He deserved better than to have his funeral desecrated by violence. If this is what it takes to protect our community, then do it. But Bumpy, no innocent people get hurt. You have my word. Saturday, August 7th, 1954. The day of the funeral. By 1 p.m., people started arriving at Abyssinian Baptist Church. Mourners in black, women with veils, men in their Sunday best. The church filled up. 300 people. Musicians played hymns. People cried. It looked like every other funeral. Except it wasn't. Hidden among the mourners were 40 of Bumpy's best men, armed, positioned, waiting. They looked like regular attendees, suits and ties, Bibles in hand, but underneath their jackets were pistols, shotguns, knives, and up front, where the casket sat on display, covered in flowers and surrounded by candles, was the centerpiece of Bumpy's plan. Outside at 1:45 p.m., Vito Genovese's men started arriving. They came in cars, 10 at a time, parked on every corner surrounding the church. By 2 p.m., 50 armed mobsters had the church completely surrounded. They watched the entrances, counted the people going in, waited for confirmation that Bumpy was inside. At 2:05 p.m., Bumpy Johnson arrived. He stepped out of a black Cadillac wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, black tie, black fedora. He walked slowly up the church steps, head held high, looking exactly like a man going to his best friend's funeral. The mob spotters saw him, radioed confirmation. "Target is inside. Repeat, Bumpy Johnson is inside the church." Genovese, waiting 3 blocks away in an armored car, smiled. "Move in." At 2:15 p.m., as the funeral service reached its peak, as the choir sang Amazing Grace and the Reverend prepared to deliver the eulogy, the doors of Abyssinian Baptist Church burst open. 50 armed men poured in through every entrance, guns drawn, shouting, chaos, everybody on the ground. This is a mob operation. Anyone moves, they die, the congregation screamed. People dropped to the floor. Women covered their children. It looked like a massacre about to happen. The mob soldiers spread out, covering every exit, guns pointed at the terrified crowd. Tony the Blade walked down the center aisle, toward the front where Bumpy Johnson sat in the first pew. "Bumpy," Tony called out, "it's over. You and your crew, stand up slowly, hands where we can see them." Bumpy stood up, calm, steady. He looked at Tony the Blade, then past him at the 50 guns pointed at his people. Then he did something Tony didn't expect. He smiled. "You made a mistake," Bumpy said quietly. "What mistake?" Tony laughed. "You're surrounded. You're dead. You should have checked the casket first." Tony's smile faded. "What?" Bumpy nodded toward the front of the church. "The mahogany casket sitting on display. Go ahead, open it. See what you're really dealing with." Tony gestured to 2 of his men. "Open it, now." The 2 soldiers walked to the casket. One of them grabbed the lid. The other kept his gun pointed at the crowd. They lifted the lid together, expecting to see Quick Eddie Morrison's body. Instead, they saw weapons, lots of them. Thompson submachine guns, pump shotguns, .45 pistols, ammunition, and in that split second of confusion, everything changed. Bumpy's men moved. The 40 armed operatives hidden among the mourners stood up simultaneously, guns appearing from under jackets, from under pews, from behind hymn books. In less than 3 seconds, the tactical situation reversed completely. The mob had come in with 50 guns. They were now facing 60, and they were standing in the middle of the church, exposed, surrounded. "Drop your weapons," Illinois Gordon's voice boomed through the church. He stood behind Tony the Blade with a shotgun pressed against the mobster's spine. "Do it now or everyone dies." The mob soldiers froze. They were caught completely. They'd walked into a church expecting to ambush grieving civilians. Instead, they'd walked into a military operation. Bumpy Johnson walked slowly down the aisle toward Tony the Blade. His footsteps echoed in the silent church. When he reached Tony, he looked him in the eyes. "You came to my friend's funeral with guns. You were going to kill mourners, women, children, people paying respects to a good man." Tony's hands were shaking. "Where's the body? Where's Morrison?" Bumpy's expression went cold. "Somewhere you'll never find it. Being buried with dignity, with respect, with honor. Not here, not with your blood staining his memory." He leaned closer. "Tell Genovese this. You don't attack funerals. You don't threaten communities. You don't come to Harlem with violence and expect to leave. These are the rules." He broke them. Now he pays. Bumpy stepped back. "Disarm them. Take every weapon. Let them walk out of here empty-handed and humiliated. Tell Genovese if he ever tries something like this again, next time we won't be so generous. Next time, the caskets will be filled with his men." Illinois and the crew moved through the church, stripping weapons from the mob soldiers, 50 guns, 50 knives, every piece of hardware the mob had brought. The soldiers stood there, defenseless, surrounded, knowing they were alive only because Bumpy allowed it. When they were disarmed, Bumpy gestured to the doors. "Get out. Walk back to Genovese. Tell him what happened here. Tell him Bumpy Johnson doesn't run, doesn't hide, and doesn't forgive disrespect." The mob soldiers filed out of the church, slowly, silently, humiliated. They walked past the mourners who were now standing, watching, understanding what they'd just witnessed. By 2:45 p.m., the church was clear. The mob was gone. And Bumpy Johnson stood at the front of the church, looking at the casket full of weapons, thinking about his friend. That night, in a private ceremony attended by only 12 people, Quick Eddie Morrison was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery. No publicity, no announcements, just Bumpy, Eddie's family, and a few close friends. They said prayers, shared stories, gave Eddie the peaceful farewell he deserved, away from violence, away from mob wars, away from the chaos that had defined so much of their lives. 2 days later, Vito Genovese received a package. Inside was a single newspaper clipping about the funeral, and written across it in red ink was a message: "Respect the dead, or join them." Genovese never tried to hit Harlem again. The story of the funeral ambush became legend, not because of the violence that happened, but because of the violence that didn't. Bumpy had 50 mobsters at his mercy. He could have killed them all, made a statement written in blood. Instead, he let them live, let them walk out humiliated, and proved something more powerful than murder ever could. Real power isn't about who's willing to kill. It's about who's smart enough not to have to. Quick Eddie Morrison died of a heart attack at 51. But his funeral, the funeral that never happened the way anyone expected, became the moment that proved Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster. He was a strategist, a protector, a man who could turn his enemy's plan into their destruction without firing a single shot. If this story showed you that the best victory is the one where your enemy defeats themselves, hit subscribe. Drop a like if you understand respect is earned through intelligence, not violence, and comment below, would you have let them walk out alive? Next legendary story drops soon. Don't miss it.